10:30. Ooh. Wrigley, it can't happen until 10:30. It looks like that was the end of the video. And just give it one more minute so folks can get in the room before we get started here. Okay. Okay, we have hit the 9 o'clock mark, so I think we'll go ahead and get this session started in the interest of time. Welcome, everybody. My name is Roz Lehman. I'm the Executive Director of the Iowa Organic Association. Thank you for joining us for Growing Stronger Together, the collaborative conference on organic and sustainable farming. And welcome to today's session. We'll go ahead and get this first session going with hazelnut finished pork in the upper Midwest. We have Dr. Pete Lammers, who's an assistant professor of animal science at the University of Wisconsin in Platteville. I will go ahead and turn the session over to Dr. Lammers. And thanks again. Oh, real quick housekeeping. Dr. Lammers is going to answer questions throughout the program. So as you have them, go ahead and pop those in the question and answer box over to the right of your screen. And we have a board member with us, Denise O'Brien of the Iowa Organic Association. She's going to pop in and ask those questions throughout the presentation. So feel free to ask Dr. Lammers your questions and we'll get those answered throughout the program. And we have some links we're going to share with you, and you'll find those displayed at the top of the question and answer box as well. So you can grab those if you're interested in that information. So as of now, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and I'll turn it over to Dr. Lammers. Thanks for being here.
All right. Well, thank you, Roz. So I hope everybody can see my first slide that says hazelnut finished pork in the upper Midwest. And if you can't, hopefully Denise or Roz will stop me before I get too much further.
So
my name is...
It's not being shared yet.
Oh.
Yep.
How about now?
Now there you go. You're good.
Okay. Well, I've been teaching online and using Zoom since last March and still have a lot to learn. Anyway, hope you're all doing very well. I'm sorry we can't be meeting face-to-face today, but if there are questions, please do ask them as we go along. I would like this presentation to be as interactive as possible and as useful to the people in the audience as it can be. Hazelnuts are a potential perennial oil crop for the upper Midwest. If we think about the need for a more resilient agricultural system, there are pieces of ground and areas where a perennial crop is by far a much better choice than an annual crop such as corn and soybeans. Hazelnuts are an extremely high crop in fat, which leads me to believe that, yes, we could grow these as an alternative to soybeans, but more than that, they have multiple saleable products. Not only the oil, but also the nuts, which are used in various baking projects and confectionaries. And of course, post-extraction, the nut, after the oil has been removed, can be processed into a gluten-free flour. Part of the challenge of hazelnut cultivation in the Midwest is our location. There are several very good cultivars from Europe and Turkey where most of the hazelnuts are grown, but those varieties are really insufficiently tolerant to our Midwest winters. If you look at US hazelnut production, it's centered primarily out in Washington and Oregon, where they have been able to use the European cultivars relatively successfully. Unfortunately, the European cultivars, in addition to not being as cold tolerant as we would like, they are also susceptible to a detrimental viral disease, Eastern filbert blight. Hazelnuts are native to North America, and there are native species that are very well adapted to our climates. However, currently they are less prolific and predictable. One group that is working on developing hazelnuts as a crop for the Upper Midwest is the Upper Midwest Hazelnut Development Initiative. I would really encourage you to seek out the information on their website if you're at all interested in growing hazelnuts. They have a lot of great resources, as well as many useful links to other organizations also engaged in hazelnut production, as well as grower support and technology transfer. When we think about hazelnut planting, according to those who work with them, they still haven't quite figured out the optimal spacing. And that has a lot to do with because germplasm is still being developed and we don't have the infrastructure and handling equipment and farmer knowledge that we would really like in order to give you good, firm recommendations. Currently, most recommendations range at you're setting your rows about 15 feet apart with 6 feet spacings within rows. Currently, most plantings of hazelnuts in the Midwest are 1 acre or less, primarily as an experimental crop. Part of the challenge of hazelnut production is that from the time you plant the seedling to the time you harvest is at least 4 years. And crop or hazelnut production doesn't really take off until the plant reaches maturity at about 8 to 10 years. Walking through a mature hazelnut planting reminds me, it's basically walking through a whole bunch of multi-stem shrubs that stand about 10 to 15 feet tall. The very promising aspect of a perennial such as hazelnut is that once established, it's very productive for decades. I mentioned that there's a wide range of germplasm available, and so the selection process is ongoing, and this shows up in the reported yields. In 2011, the Midwest Hazelnut Development Initiative conducted a survey of mature plantings in the Midwest and reported back that most producers, on average, were yielding 260 pounds of shelled kernels per acre. This is quite different from the perhaps optimistic 2021 sales pitch from various nurseries, and yet I think it just demonstrates how there's a lot of room for improvement and growth in terms of genetics, understanding growing conditions, as well as expertise when it comes to cultivating hazelnuts. So invariably, when we talk about perennial crops, someone always wants to ask, well, why even bother? We have these extremely prolific crops right now. There's no way that we're going to replace them. Why even bother? And I would argue that, at least in terms of hazelnut production, we're somewhere on the left side of this screen. If we think about corn yields in the US from the Civil War through essentially World War II, we were pretty much flat. Post-World War II, improvements in hybrid technology and adoption of hybrid seeds, as well as commercial fertilizers and other farming practices, saw a dramatic increase in productivity. Now, I don't know where we are on this curve. I don't think we are at 1940 in terms of hazelnut production. But if we don't start working with them, we're never going to be able to achieve greater yields or productivity. Currently, most hazelnuts grown in the Midwest are a variant of, or a cross between the European varieties and our local varieties. However, processing still remains a challenge for local growers. Particularly problematic is the fact that the local hazelnuts or the native hazelnuts tend to produce a nut that is slightly smaller than the European cultivars. Processing a hazelnut that is less than 10 millimeters in diameter is particularly challenging with current equipment. And even on those processing equipment, we still have incomplete separation of nut and shell. And so with that in mind, Jason Fischbach and I developed a project to evaluate using hazelnuts, particularly hazelnuts that were undersized and not able to be marketed into the food chain, as a value-added product as a feed for pigs. The first step was to analyze the nutrient profile of various hazelnut products. As noted, the kernel is extremely high in fat, very rich, relatively rich in protein, and not too bad on fiber. As we would expect, most of the fiber is going to be concentrated in the shell. However, if we're looking at a 10 millimeter in-shell hazelnut, we still have 20% fat despite the very high level of acid detergent fiber. I'm a little concerned about the level of fiber, but as a nutritionist, when I see 10 millimeter in-shell hazelnuts have 20% fat, I'm forced to admit, well, there's a lot of energy there. I bet the pigs are going to grow. If we think about these fiber values, neutral detergent fiber can help predict feed intake. So the higher level is going to decrease feed intake, while ADF is going to predict digestibility. So the more acid detergent fiber in a particular feed, the less digestible we would anticipate it being. Compared to corn, soybeans, or soybean meal, hazelnuts certainly are a higher fiber crop. However, their crude fat profile matches favorably with roasted soybeans, and I think this could be a potential feed crop. Particularly exciting about hazelnuts is their fatty acid profile. First of all, they have to have a high level of fat, but also very interesting to us is which specific fatty acids are present. If we look at the in-shell hazelnuts, the 16% oleic acid, which has 18 carbons and 1 double bond, is particularly interesting. And the reason it's interesting is if we look at other niche markets for pork products and we scan the globe and we look at different prices that are paid for different products. Now, I don't know that this is the most high value ham ever, but currently acorn-fed Iberian hams ranging 13 to 16 pounds are selling for $14,000. Fortunately, the website will throw in free shipping. And if we calculate that out, that's a $100 ham. Well, one of the major features of this ham is that it's been fed acorns. And acorns dramatically increase the oleic acid content in pork. By comparison, when we feed acorns to pigs, those acorns have about 43 grams of oleic acid per kilogram of dry matter. And our in-shell hazelnuts, although not as high as the acorns, certainly are higher than most of our other feedstuffs here in the US. And so the question arose, can we create a high-value regional product based on a co-product of a perennial crop here in the Midwest? Well, it's fine and good to do a feed analysis and hypothesize that what'll happen when we feed the pigs. But in order to have solid information, you actually have to feed the pigs. And so we set up a research trial at the Iowa State University Western Research Farm in Western Iowa using the bedded hoop barns for pigs. For our trial, we used the 3 mini hoop barns located on the lower half of the picture in the upper right. And those 3 barns each measure about 20 feet by 36 feet. When we divide those buildings in half and set aside some areas to store feed, as well as research equipment, particularly a scale, and provide space for us to effectively weigh them, we actually had 2 pens per barn that were approximately 10 feet by 28.8 feet. We stocked those pens with 6 barrows, thus giving each pig approximately 48 square feet of living area. We ran 2 replicated feeding trials. So in 2 separate instances, we stocked the barn with 36 barrows, 6 pens of 6. They were approximately 128 pounds at the start. And then we fed the hazelnuts for almost 10 weeks and marketed the pigs at approximately 69 days later after starting feeding. We fed 2 different diets to the pigs in these hoop barns. Half of the pens were randomly assigned to receive a corn soybean meal control diet. The other half were assigned the control diet diluted with 10% in-shell hazelnuts. If you've ever fed pigs, you know that particle size is really important. And if we were going to mix whole hazelnuts with ground pig feed, our feeders probably wouldn't work very effectively. We would anticipate a lot of feed waste. We also weren't really comfortable with just allowing the pigs to have free access to the hazelnuts because we were really interested in knowing the level of hazelnuts that were ultimately consumed. And so we used a small roller mill that was initially designed to support microbreweries to process our hazelnuts. It was a little variable, and yes, it took some learning and some trial and error at first, but eventually the farm staff determined that they could process about 200 pounds of hazelnuts, which would be adequate amount of hazelnuts to mix into a ton of pig feed in about 15 minutes. A real key to processing the hazelnuts was to run the hazelnuts 2 times through the feed mill. The first time, you're essentially cracking the shell and starting to break it down a little bit, and then you're tightening the rollers to get that final particle size of around 1,772 microns. If we think about the micron or the size of pig feed, we usually measure that in terms of microns. Now, our corn soy diet that we were feeding as the control diet had an 800 micron particle size, while the milled hazelnuts had a 1,772 average micron size. Particle size is important because it does impact digestibility. All other things being equal, we would anticipate that feed that is more finely ground would be more digestible, as long as we haven't exceeded the lower limit. And so if we are looking at our diets, we're feeding a corn soy diet that has 800 microns, whereas the corn soy plus hazelnut, when diluted, had a feed micron of 991 microns. And so just from particle size alone, we may anticipate that digestibility of this hazelnut diet is going to be slightly lower. Your eyes may be better than mine, but most eyes can't tell a particle size difference of 200 microns. On the picture on the left, we have our ground corn and soy feed mixed with 10% in-shell hazelnuts. And on the right, we have our standard control diet. Now, yes, the feed on the left may have a slightly more brownish hue, but compared to all the pig feed I've seen in my research and in my farming experience, you know, this hazelnut feed doesn't look really different from just regular pig feed. So as part of the trial, we weighed pigs every 4 weeks and recorded their feed use. And then at the end of 70 days, we harvested the batch of pigs, all on the same day, all at the same commercial abattoir. The first 36 pigs were harvested August of 2019, and the second batch were harvested February of 2020. At harvest, we measured various carcass quality traits. We also collected 2 chops from the last rib location of each pig. We additionally collected 1 cube of fat from 1 chop per pig and used these chops and fat samples to analyze quality attributes and the fatty acid profile of the pork fat. Now, earlier I was hedging my bets, talking about the high fiber in hazelnuts and the relatively large particle size, and I was quite surprised with the results presented here on this chart. Given the high fiber content, I was fully expecting, or wouldn't have been completely surprised, that the pigs fed hazelnuts might have grown a little bit slower. We did not see that in this experiment. Similarly, with the lower digestibility, we may anticipate that feed intake would be statistically higher. However, again, even though we have a small sample size, the power of the statistics and the way that we designed this study tells us, at least in this situation, average daily feed intake was not different between the 2 treatments. What was different was the relative efficiency. And the question may arise, well, how can average daily gain be not different, but average daily feed intake is? And what I would say is the difference in average daily feed intake isn't great enough to be detectable all by itself, but when combined with average daily gain, it starts to show up in terms of feed efficiency. The pigs that were fed the hazelnut diet consumed 6% more feed per unit of gain over the study period. And while that isn't insignificant, I think it's really important to focus on the fact that these pigs finished at approximately, or at the same time, and at approximately the same weights. And so if we think about scheduling of meat processing and being able to predict when our pigs are going to be able to reach market, at least in this trial, diluting our diets with 10% hazelnut was not going to significantly alter our projection for harvest date, which if you're scheduling processing out 12, 18 months is really a good thing.
Hey, Pete,
yes.
I have a question. I have 2 questions, actually. What was the breed of hog in this trial? If someone joined late, I'm not sure that you mentioned it earlier. And then is there a taste difference with using hazelnuts?
Right. Okay. So the breed of hog, they are crossbred pigs that were being marketed into an existing niche market system that features high quality pork. They look like typical white pigs, but they are part of a system that is marketing for pork quality in alternative production systems. The taste difference we're going to talk about in a couple slides here, but if I don't address it, I will certainly, please re-bring it up, Denise. All right, so the growth performance was very similar, but what about the carcass attributes? Well, as we might expect based on the growth performance, the carcasses were not distinguishable between the 2 treatments. We had similar carcass weights, similar fat depths. When looking at the quality attributes, similar color score, similar pH, marbling was not statistically different. Warner-Bratzler shear force was the same, and cook loss was nearly identical as well. If we look at these numbers, color score, pH, and marbling, we would tend to want bigger numbers. A pH of 6 would be considered higher quality than a pH of 4, for example. For the lower 2 values, for Warner-Bratzler shear force, that's the amount of force required to cut into the meat, we would prefer a lower number. And for cook loss, that's a measurement of the amount of mass that is lost as the chop is cooked. And so again, we would prefer a lower number in that area. So they did not grow differently. The quality was essentially the same. But the whole reason we fed this novel crop was to see if we could change the fatty acid profile of the pork. And in that regard, we were quite successful. Feeding 10% hazelnut to pigs fed in for 7 weeks or for 10 weeks in hoop barns statistically increased the amount of oleic acid and decreased the amount of palmitic acid in the pork fat. This translated into a decrease in total saturated fatty acids and an increase in monounsaturated fatty acids. We had also planned to do a series of taste tests and taste panels. Unfortunately, as you may recall, starting about March 2020, we had this major change in everyone's life, and we were not able to complete the taste panel while following health regulations or protocol. So the take-home results from this project. The pigs grew well when fed up to 10% in-shell hazelnuts. Processing of the hazelnut prior to feeding was very important for the success of this project. And we've demonstrated that we can maintain pork quality while altering the fatty acid profile of pork in the desired direction. But before we pat ourselves too hard on the back and celebrate, let's think about what we were trying to accomplish. One of the reasons we were interested in feeding hazelnuts was to see if we could create a similarly high value product comparable to the $100 ham. Carcass and quality traits of those extremely expensive hams is somewhat limited, but I did find one study specified here where they were able to compare acorn-fed free-range pigs against commercial diets. So the first two lines, the corn soy meal diet and the 10% in-shell hazelnuts, these are the results from our study. Whereas the last two lines are looking at the fatty acid profile of pork fed in Europe under different feeding regimes for 117 days. And you'll see, well, we were able to increase the oleic acid in the hazelnut-fed pigs. We're still not approaching the acorn-fed free-range hog level of oleic acid. I think it's also important to remind ourselves that people are paying $100 per pound for acorn-fed ham from Iberia, not just because of the oleic acid, but because they're triple stacking or quadruple stacking quality traits. These are pigs fed in a very specific region of the world, they are from a very specific breed, and they follow very specific guidelines in terms of pig spacing, feed allowance, and general care and activity of the animal. The pigs that are raised for the $100 per pound ham are the Iberian Blacks. And local growers refer to them as the walking olive tree. Now, to the eye of an American pig producer, these pigs are extremely skinny, tall, and have very, very long legs. However, these pigs are extremely well adapted to surviving on very low quality feed for most of the year, and then gorging themselves during the 3 to 4 months when acorns are available and storing those resources away for future use. The acorns that are producing this $100 per pound ham consist of holm oak, gall oak, and cork oak. I am not a specialist in trees. They look similar to the oak trees that grow around here, although the actual acorn was considerably larger. Also notable about the acorns that are being fed to these pigs or that are being grazed by the acorn-fed pigs is that the acorn shell is rather delicate and peels away pretty easily. And so if you walk out into a pasture of pigs that are grazing these acorns, you'll see them take a mouthful and they'll chew around, and then they'll start spitting out the acorn shells, sort of like a high school baseball team just given a bag of sunflower seeds. That is very different properties of the acorn compared to the hazelnut that we are feeding. The hazelnut we're feeding has a much more robust shell, and it's much more difficult to separate. The other aspect of the $100 per pound ham that we haven't addressed is the fact that it's a long established tradition. In fact, producers tell me that the century-old trees give the best acorns that raise the best hams. And so it's going to be a while before we have a similarly robust system here in the US to produce an equivalent product. For those of us really interested in comparing pig production, we can think about acorn-fed pigs in Southwest Spain. And I had the opportunity to travel to Spain with a group of students prior to COVID. And we spent time traveling through different farms and systems. And we actually spent a day and a half talking with producers of these types of pigs, as well as the processors. And yes, production numbers are always variable across different farms and different farmers. But in general, they told me that they would raise a pig for about 10 to 12 months on a typical corn soy diet, and then move it out for the last 3 to 4 months on an acorn pasture. They would be harvested following pasturing on the acorn savanna. In order to meet the nutritional needs of the pigs, as well as welfare standards of their market, they were allotting 7 to 15 acres per pig. A lot of that size difference had to do with the density and the age of the oak trees available in the pasture. But on average, they would expect that their pigs to consume about 10 pounds of acorns per day and gain about 2 pounds per day for the last 3 to 4 months. For those of us more familiar with US systems, we know that that's dramatically different from our system. Typically here, even pasture-fed organic pigs are usually harvested at about 6 months, if not younger. Where the production differences really are marked are in the curing process. So we raised the pig for 18 months, and now if we want to sell it as $100 per pound ham, it's a 2 to 5 year curing process.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So it's a significant investment if we think about the infrastructure and just the outlay of capital necessary to make this flow. And I will allow that the hams are amazing. They're really delicious. Everybody should go and try them. But most people are not going to be buying a $100 pound ham at the same volumes that we typically think of selling pork here in the US. If you're interested in learning more about the Spanish Iberian hams and the process of raising these pigs, here are 3 links that are filled with mostly accurate information that I found. There are obviously others out there.
Pete, before we go much further, I've got some questions stacked up here. So
Sure.
one was back to the hazelnuts. I'm sorry, I didn't get this sooner. Was it organic feed, and were antibiotics fed or administered? That's question 1.
Was it organic feed? Was that the question?
Was it organic feed used? Yeah.
Okay. So these pigs are not fed organic feed. They are fed conventional corn, soybean diets. They are not treated with antibiotics, or let me rephrase that. They cannot be treated with antibiotics and enter into the market chain that they're selling into. They're not fed subtherapeutic antibiotics in the feed. They were farrowed in a crate-free system, raised on bedding throughout their lifetime. But we did obviously castrate and follow typical vaccination schedules for that area of Iowa.
Okay, thank you. And then the next question was, and I think you answered this early. They came in a little late, but the hazelnuts that you used were seconds, non-marketable hazelnuts. Is that correct?
Yeah, I guess that's how we would characterize them. So there's a hazelnut processing, I believe it's a cooperative in Gaze Mills, Wisconsin. And growers from Wisconsin, Minnesota, and I believe Iowa aggregate their nuts together in order to sell into larger streams. And the nuts that are less than 1 millimeter in size, or less than 11 millimeters in size, they're perfectly good nuts. It's not that they've been infested with a weevil or anything like that. It's just that they're too small to efficiently process. And so we actually got hazelnuts from multiple locations in Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota that we pulled together in this project. But they would be considered unsaleable or not worth processing for the human food market chain.
Okay. And was there a financial analysis done with the research, or was it just how to produce research?
How to produce these pigs, or cash flow for the pigs, or?
Well, the question says, was there a financial analysis done with this research, or just this how-to production research?
Yeah, so this is just a pilot project, more of a demonstration to see what happens when we feed pigs hazelnut. In order to do a fair economic comparison, we would have to have a market that we could sell the hazelnut-fed pigs into. And well, I am sure I could have found several people who would have been interested in buying a pig or two. There really isn't the price premium, or there really isn't a chain to sell these hazelnut-fed pigs into yet that would be paying a premium. I guess if we think about the relative cost and growth rate on these pigs, they grew the same, they consumed about the same amount of feed, and so depending on the price of hazelnuts, it could certainly be beneficial. One of the challenges is, as with many very small markets, it's really hard to have a good handle on what is an equitable price for cull hazelnuts.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then the next one is, while on acorn pasture, did they also get fed a corn soybean mix, feed?
Okay, so the extremely high value acorn-fed Iberian pigs that are marketed at the high level, there's various gradations of certification, and the highest value ones are not fed corn and soy diets while on pasture. So for 3 to 4 months, they're subsisting on primarily acorns, as well as what they can forage in those 7 to 15 acres.
Okay. And then there's two, again, back to the taste aspect, that you didn't get it, COVID made it so that you couldn't do what you wanted to do, but people obviously ate these pigs, this pork. So did you have any feedback from, and did you yourself try them?
Sadly, I was not able to try them due to various issues that happened as they occurred. So these pigs, ultimately, we marketed them into a niche market chain that did not distinguish between the hazelnut fed and the acorn fed, or the hazelnut and the typical fed, primarily because there wasn't, at least as far as we could tell, a large enough difference that the average consumer would be able to detect it at the levels we fed. Okay. We did do one small taste panel work with the hazelnut pork, where we cooked multiple pork chops and we had samples out for people. And although many people thought they could identify which chops were hazelnut fed and which ones weren't, it was really unreliable. You know, everybody's palate is a little bit different, and taste panels are very, very difficult to gather adequate data to have reliable results because of that. So I guess, no, I haven't tried them, but I will say that we haven't had any complaints from anyone who has.
All right, and one more question. What about the lifespan of hazelnuts for feed? Once ground, will it expire quickly or last a few months? Would the oils go rancid?
Yes, so we did not look at that specifically. However, the hazelnut processors tell me that as long as if you harvest the nut and you keep it in the intact shell, it should be, and you follow standard storage procedures, right? You don't put it out in the sun or in the rain, and you keep it in a temperature stable, relatively stable location without extreme fluctuations, that they are shelf stable for at least a year, if not longer. We did not do any examination of after we ground the nuts, how fast we had to feed them. I would anticipate that if we were going to actually feed these on farm, we probably would wait to grind them before feeding, because as we ground them, we were releasing the oil. And I anticipate that if we put that oil-rich ground hazelnut cake into a storage unit in the middle of summer, we'd have a brick by the next time we wanted to use it. Fortunately, at the levels we were feeding, the feed did not aggregate together, but I think just the ground hazelnuts, that might have been a challenge.
Okay. And then here's one more, and then I'll let you get back to your presentation. But also I displayed in the Q&A box the YouTube videos and that for those to for the audience to use. So, and the last question is for now is, are any information available on the fat/protein/fiber content of acorns compared to hazelnuts? How much more hazelnut would it be possible to push into a hog ration?
That's an excellent question. So the challenge I am having as I'm looking for exactly that information in terms of acorns is there's a small group of acorn research being done in Spain on the very specific acorns that are being used to feed these pigs. However, they are different from the acorns that would be fed in the US. The US literature on acorns is primarily as a resource for squirrel populations and other wildlife. And although that is certainly valuable and valid research, they are asking different questions than a swine nutritionist wants to know. And I think it's a good place to mention this, that our actual next steps for this project are to start feeding different levels, different graded levels of hazelnuts, ranging from 0% to as much as 30%, including just 10% de-shelled hazelnuts to pigs, and seeing what sort of differences we can accomplish. This, of course, still precludes, we have no idea if people in the US will like the flavor of hazelnut-fed pork, or if they do, how much they're willing to pay. But again, if we think in the long term, as with most niche products, it's going to be an evolution of development. Were there any other questions, Denise, or should I wrap?
This is Roz. I see one more question that came in. In a practical sense, do you think grinding up the nuts would be necessary, or do you think the pigs would nutritionally, naturally digest the whole nut, shell, and meat?
I think the answer to that question is it depends. So we were looking at comparing hazelnut-fed pigs to other pigs that were being marketed into a niche market stream. And so those pigs were being fed a ground corn soy diet. And I feel that if we had not ground the hazelnuts, we would have had a really difficult time incorporating them into the feed. And so if we had mixed them in, we would have seen a lot of feed waste just because the pigs would be rooting through the feeder and sorting. Now, I don't know if they would prefer the hazelnuts or not, but we would anticipate that feed waste would be higher if we were feeding the intact in-shell hazelnuts. I don't anticipate that this is a market where we are going to harvest hazelnuts and feed it to large groups of pigs in large barns. And by large groups of pigs, I'm talking groups of 50. Where I see feeding hazelnuts to pigs, at least currently, as being a valuable option, is for people who are growing hazelnuts already, who have a small batch that they're trying to add value to, and they're still playing around curious with, well, how can we do this in order to add value to this co-product? In that situation, I could anticipate feeding whole hazelnuts as an option for pigs in a pen. I would be very interested in doing that work, but again, it's one of those questions that remains. I'm very confident that a pig's jaw, particularly a 150-pound pig, is going to crack a hazelnut. I just don't know if they're going to bother dealing with those when they have access to other feed options.
So Pete, there's a couple more questions. Do you want to end are you about to the end of your presentation, or do you want these, or what do you want?
Yep, this is my last slide, so we can go ahead. So
okay.
before we go to the questions, I just want to share, so the Upper Midwest Hazelnut Development Initiative has been working on developing germplasm. And these are some examples of the varieties that are being grown in the Upper Midwest and being constantly improved on. And, you know, there's variation, but where there's variation, there's opportunity. I do want to thank my collaborators who assisted with this project, including my two colleagues at UW-Platteville, the farm manager out at Iowa State University, and Jim Magulski on the processing end, as well as my co-grant writer and Jeff Jensen, who organized the nut supply from Iowa, as well as the Upper Midwest Hazelnut Development Initiative for supplying the hazelnuts in Wisconsin. So now I am ready for questions.
Okay, good. And I'll make sure my was muted before, so Ross took over.
No problem.
Thanks everybody for your patience on this. So this is one that says, regarding flavor, is there any distinct difference in flavor between acorn-fed in Spain and conventionally fed pigs in Spain? The expensive Iberian pork is cured for 2 to 5 years, so to some extent a different product than fresh meat.
Absolutely. If you take a sample of the acorn-fed ham, you are definitely going to taste a difference from the ham that's available in the deli counter or the average ham. But they're completely different products. I believe that, yes, the acorn-fed pig has a different flavor profile, even if we harvested it fresh and ate it. But I think the real value there is the aging process and the cultural tradition of this ham eating experience. if you've never been to southern Spain, it may sound ridiculous, but almost every restaurant, coffee house, place that you can get food will have one of these ham legs prominently displayed. And slicing this ham is a very specialized and highly paid task. I was talking with one purveyor of this product, and he was telling me it was a three-year apprenticeship, and for the first year he didn't even get to touch the ham. And so, right, yes, I think there is a different flavor profile, but I think there's a lot more going into that $100 ham than just the flavor. And so what I say back to well, we're never going to be able to sell $100 ham here in the US, that just won't fly, is we are selling $100 ham. And so maybe if we could, we don't know the niche, we don't know the market for what it is, but I think there is space to explore what would the marketplace be willing to pay for a locally raised, pasture-fed pig that was grazed on a perennial crop grown here in the Midwest. Something along that. We aren't going to import Spain. We aren't going to export our hams to Spain and expect them to pay for it, right? But I think the Spanish example is a really good example for us involved in meat production to be thinking about how do we start triple stacking quality attributes that consumers value.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think that's really an important question. And the last one I have so far is getting back to organic and profitability. Are there any challenges with growing hazelnuts organically?
That I don't know almost virtually nothing about, but since I have a PhD, I'm happy to wade into it. So I would refer the person with that specific question to go to the Upper Midwest Hazelnut Development Initiative website. I am not aware that there's been specific work looking at growing hazelnut organically. I do know that as long as you don't have to worry about the Eastern filbert blight, which is the major reason we can't grow the European varieties here, there is relatively low pest pressure during the life cycle of a hazelnut. Again, I don't know on the organic certification of hazelnuts.
Okay, thank you. I have no more questions, and we're at the end of the session, but I do have a question personally as the Q&A moderator about the this is in a perennial, because it's a perennial crop, and it seems to me that this kind of thing would fit in well with looking at long-term climate change issues, and that we could switch to maybe some more is it possible we could switch from some of the things we're doing, and that's what your research is about, to more long-term that would be carbon sequestering as opposed to carbon using?
Yeah, I think certainly hazelnuts are not a silver bullet that are going to solve all of our problems. But I think there is definitely utility in this future crop that if we invest in developing it and figuring out how to use it and grow it, may have big dividends.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, Roz, it's back to you as the moderator.
Hi, guys. Last chance for any questions. We still have some extra time. If there are any pressing things you want Dr. Lammers to share with you. Let's give you another second or so, minute or so to plug those questions in if you have them. Otherwise, we will get close to wrapping up. Take one quick second, see if anybody has anything else they want to ask. Well, you packed a lot of information in just under an hour, Dr. Lammers. We really appreciate your time and the information that you shared with us. It looks like we do have one more quick question that came in. So
Yes, it does.
Yes, it does. Go ahead, Denise.
Okay, any anecdotal comments on the flavor of hazelnut fed pigs? Did you, oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm reading the wrong one. I got to go down to the end. I was getting, back
And
to
this one was in pending, Denise, just so you know, the one I'm looking at.
All right. Okay, here we go. Okay. Just sorry if you covered this, just logging on. Any change with the firmness of the fat?
That's an excellent question.
Oh, I'm glad we got it.
And that is potentially a limitation to feeding high levels of hazelnut to pigs. So if we've ever processed a pig and or we've ever eaten bacon, we know that fat quality matters, and the firmness of the fat is very important when we're processing that pig. At the 10% hazelnut level, we did not see a difference or a detectable difference in fat characteristics. However, when we're looking at the acorn-fed pigs, if you go and you touch one of those hams and just run your hands down the side of it, you'll actually feel, your hands will come away greasy. And it's because of that high oleic acid content. And so at the levels we fed, we did not see a fat quality concern. However, I think if we go on the other extreme, I could see that becoming a potential problem, particularly for a consuming public that is looking for what I'll call the traditional profile of pork fat. So that's a non-answer to the question, but we did not measure fat hardness. I do not anticipate a difference at the levels we fed. That's an excellent question that remains to be answered if we start feeding more and more.
Okay. And then, and people are still submitting. So here we go. We've got.
That's fine. I got all day.
We've got 30 more minutes. Yes. Okay. So any thoughts as to alternative feed products to hazelnuts?
Well, it's really hard to go wrong with feeding corn and soybean meal to pigs, especially at today's prices. I mean, very high energy, pretty good balanced protein. But I don't think that's the question that people are actually asking. I will say that we can feed almost anything to pigs and reasonably expect them to grow as long as we do it creatively and intelligently. And what I mean by that is if we're looking at a feed stuff and trying to figure out how much to feed and what value it has, I am really interested in looking at the amount of fiber in that feed, the amount of protein, and the amount of fat. And it's not fair to say fat can replace fiber, but higher fat feeds, you can usually get away with a little higher fiber without it altering performance. I think recognizing a feed, whether it's a protein source or a source of energy, is also important. we often have requests and questions about feeding oats or barley as replacements for soybean meal as being higher in protein. Well, yes, most small grains do have more protein than corn grain, but they're nowhere near the protein content of peas or soybeans or soybean meal. And so there are lots of different alternative feeds for pigs. I really encourage people to try feeding them to their own pigs and see what happens, usually at lower levels, and then doing so in a way that you're more likely to have success, i.e. feeding at lower levels and paying attention to the nutrient profile of that feed and really thinking about what can you realistically substitute your alternative feed for in your current diet.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And there's another one kind of related to that, although it's about the high oleic feeds or oil crop byproducts. Are there others that could play into this, like sunflower and pumpkin seeds?
That I have no idea. I can't recall off the top of my head the oleic content of sunflower or pumpkin. Again, it's certainly potential, but no, I don't know.
Okay. And then there's a person here that wants to, if they wanted to experiment on our farm with hazelnut finished pork, can we support your research or get involved with other research going on this product?
Yes. So I can't promise, but I will tell you that I am always looking for willing partners and collaborators. And so if you are interested in talking through some options or some ideas, by all means, please reach out to me via email or a phone call. The phone is certainly fine, but honestly, email is probably the most likely way that you're going to get a rapid response from me due to my teaching schedule.
Okay. And then there is, I've said this several times, there's one last question, and we'll see if this is the last question, but any nutritional value in the green husks?
We did not look at the green husks on the hazelnut. I would anticipate that, knowing what I know about how the hazelnuts grow and looking at them and stuff like that, those husks would be probably very high fiber. And so if I was trying to use that high fiber product most effectively, I would probably feed it to a ruminant animal, like a dry cow or a beef steer or goats or sheep. And actually, although not part of this project at all, I have been in conversations with some ruminant nutritionists about looking at feeding the hazelnut hull.
I'm thinking it's over to you, Roz.
Okay. It might look like we're actually wrapping up at this time. So last chance. Any final questions for Dr. Lammers? Go ahead and submit those in the Q&A chat box. Give it one more second. Other than that, again, we really appreciate everybody's time today. Thanks for signing on. I hope you are participating in other sessions of the conference over the next few days. Again, if you have any other additional questions after the presentation, feel free to follow up with Dr. Lammers directly. Again, I think we're done with the questions, and I think we'll let you go. So thanks everybody for signing on. Have a great day, and thanks for being a part of this innovative virtual conference this year. Take care.
Okay, Roz and Pete, we're still on, right? Not? Bye.